My name is Tuesday Lel. I am 35 years old, and I count other people's money for a living. 2 years ago, my entire family begged me to save their store. Last month, at my own birthday party, in front of half the town I grew up in, my father turned to me, looked me directly in the eyes, and said 6 words I will never forget for the rest of my life. I wish you were never born. I didn't argue with him. I didn't cry. I reached into my bag, set a ring of keys on the table in front of everyone, and walked out into the dark. But here is what none of them understood about a forensic accountant. The thing holding their entire world together was never the store or the family name or 50 years of history painted on a wooden sign above a door on Main Street. It was a single signature, mine, and 4 weeks before that party, I had already decided, quietly and completely, that I would never give again that I grew up in Hartwell, Ohio, a town of 9,000 people and one stoplight that nobody genuinely obeys. My family has run Low Hardware on Main Street since 1976. Paint, plumbing fittings, the good kind of work gloves, a key cutting machine older than I am. I left at 18 for accounting school in Columbus and never moved back. That is the part everyone in my family remembers most clearly and most often. I am the one who left. I am the daughter who got a degree, then a license, then a career building cases against people who manipulate their financial records. I live 40 minutes away now in a 1-bedroom condo I paid for entirely by myself, with a view of a parking garage and a silence I have come to love deeply. And once a month on a Sunday, I make that 40-minute drive back to Hartwell to do the store's books for free, because somewhere along the way I convinced myself that staying gone meant I owed them my weekends and why mother calls helping out. I called it penance for a long time. The thing about being the one who left is that you spend the rest of your life trying to prove that you didn't really leave. So I balanced their ledgers. I caught their math errors. I filed their quarterly taxes and never once sent an invoice. In 35 years, my family has called me for exactly one reason, and it was never a good one. They call when something is broken. They have never once called to tell me something was going right. I used to think that made me essential. It took me until I was 35 years old to understand that it only made me convenient. My brother Brandon is 3 years younger than me, and he was born standing in the light. By the time he could walk, my parents had a green canvas apron hanging behind the register with Lowell and Son embroidered across the chest in gold thread. He was 18 months old. There was no apron with my name on it. There never has been. I asked my mother once when I was 10 if I could have one too. She laughed and said the store was more of a Brandon thing. Then she handed me the ring of keys instead. 12 keys on a brass ring. Front door, stockroom, register, the safe, the back gate. Somebody responsible should hold these, she said, as though it were an honor. It was not an honor. It meant I was the one who opened on Saturdays at 6 a.m. It meant I was the one who locked up when my father's back went out. I was the kid kneeling on the cold floor, counting the till while Brandon got driven to baseball practice. Why mother has a way of describing her 2 children that she has used my entire life. Brandon has a low touch. She tells the neighbors, the customers, anyone willing to listen, he could sell a furnace to a man in July. And then she glances at me and adds, in the exact same warm voice, and Tuesday has spreadsheets. She says it like a consolation prize. For years I let it sit there, a small splinter I never bothered to pull. I told myself the apron was just an apron. But you don't hand a 9-year-old a ring of keys because you trust her. You do it because you have already decided which child you're going to be proud of. And it is not the one holding the keys 2 years ago. The store nearly died. A big box hardware chain opened 12 miles out by the highway, and Low Hardware bled customers for 8 straight months. The bank threatened to pull the line of credit. My father stopped sleeping. My mother started calling me 3 times a day. And for once, the calls weren't about a tax form. They needed a guarantor. The bank would extend a $60,000 line of credit, but only if someone with real income and real credit history put their name behind it. That someone was me. So I drove out to Hartwell and did what they asked. I am not a reckless person, though, so I did the way an accountant does everything. I had my own attorney, Paul Stebbins, paper the whole arrangement carefully. The guarantee was limited and capped at the loan amount, with a fixed 2-year term ending that coming spring. The collateral was the store's own inventory and fixtures. Not my condo, not my savings, nothing of mine except my signature and a promise. I read every line twice. I kept a copy in a labeled folder in a fireproof drawer home. When my mother saw me 3-hole punching the paperwork at the kitchen table, she shook her head like I had insulted her. "You keep receipts on your own family," she said. She meant it as a wound. The way she says everything hurtful, in a perfectly measured tone only the family can fully hear. I just kept punching holes. Because in my profession, the people who get destroyed are never the ones who kept receipts. They are the ones who trusted that they would never need them. I didn't know it yet, sitting at that table, but that sentence of hers was going to come back around. And when it did, I was finally going to get to answer it properly. That spring, I drove out for my usual Sunday with the books, and I could smell the trouble before I opened the first ledger. The store felt wrong. Half the shelves were thin. The good drill bits were gone and hadn't been reordered. 2 vendors had switched the account to cash only, which only happens after you have missed enough checks. I sat at the desk in the back office and ran the numbers, and the numbers were ugly. Revenue down 31% year over year. Payable stacked 3 months deep. And there, taped to the wall above the desk where it had hung my entire life, was the store's promotional calendar, the cheap one they print every December with a tractor on the cover. Except this year, someone had taken a red marker to a date in late May and circled it twice. I knew that date. It was a maturity date on the line of credit. The day the bank's clock ran out. The day the loan came due in full unless it was renewed. Somebody in my family had been staring at that red circle every single day, counting down. Brandon was nowhere in the store. My father told me he was out meeting a supplier, which is the kind of thing Brandon says when he wants to leave early. I flipped through the cash log and noticed until coming up short on a handful of nights. Small amounts, the kind you might blame on a careless teenager. I made a note to look closer. Then my phone buzzed on the desk. It was my mother, using the bright and careful voice she reserves for when she has already decided something. "Your father and I want the whole family together," she said. "End of the month. We have something important to discuss." The something important came out 2 days later over a pot roast my mother served like a peace offering. They didn't say it plainly. My family never says anything plainly. My father cleared his throat and talked about legacy, about 50 years, about how a man's name on a door means something. My mother dabbed at her eyes before there were any actual tears in them. And then Brandon, who showed up 40 minutes late, leaned back in his chair and said it for all of them. "We just need you to sign again. Renew the line. Bump it up a little so we can restock and remodel." I asked for the number. My father looked at the table. My mother said the bank had mentioned $250,000. That is not a renewal. That is not a little. That is 4 times the original line, and they wanted my name behind every dollar of it. Plus, my mother added gently, whatever I could contribute from my own savings, just to show the bank the family was serious. I sat there and did the math that nobody else in that room was capable of doing. A $250,000 personal guarantee doesn't just sit quietly in a drawer. It sits on my credit report. It follows me into every mortgage application, every professional background check, every case I would ever testify in as an expert witness. It would put my entire financial future behind a store that was hemorrhaging cash and a brother who couldn't keep the till straight. A guarantee isn't a formality, I said. It's me promising a bank with my own life that you'll be good for it. My mother smiled as though I had agreed. "Exactly," she said. "And you're so good with all that paperwork." That was the moment I understood clearly for the first time. To them, my signature was not questioned. It was already mine to give and theirs to spend. I told them I needed time to think, and you would have thought I had set the pot roast on fire. My mother's face went smooth and cold, which is far more dangerous than her raising her voice. By the next morning, the story was already moving through Hartwell without me in it. My cousin texted to ask if I was really going to let Uncle Glenn lose everything. A woman from my parents' church messaged to say she was praying for the family situation. My mother had spent the week on the phone, building me into a villain before I could open my mouth. Tuesday's changed since she moved to city. Tuesday thinks she's better than us now. Tuesday counts pennies while her own father drowns. She is very skilled at this. She has been doing it my whole life, just never with this much money on the line. The only person who called to warn me was my Aunt Morin, my mother's younger sister, the one relative who has never once repeated the family script. "Honey," she said, "your mother is writing the ending before you get to the first chapter. Don't let her." I asked what she meant. Morin went quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that has 30 years of history behind it. "There are things about your mother you don't know," she said, "about why she does what she does. We'll talk." Then I thought about a line my mother had used on a neighbor I happened to overhear recently. "We gave that girl everything," she had said, "sweet as syrup. Now she counts pennies at her own father." I hadn't been given everything. I had been given a ring of keys. But I was beginning to understand that in my family, the truth belonged to whoever told it first, and a week later, a printed invitation arrived in the mail. Not a phone call, not a text. A proper printed invitation. The kind you order in bulk, with a photograph of the storefront on the front. Lowell Hardware, 50 years on Main. There would be a block party on the town square, the street closed off, a barbecue, the high school band, a banner. My parents had invited the whole town, and folded into the bottom of the card, in smaller letters that looked like an afterthought, but were anything but, were these words: "Also celebrating Tuesday's 35th birthday. We hope she'll help us celebrate the next 50 years together." I read that line 4 times. They had never once thrown me a birthday party. Not at 12, not at 21, not at 30. Brandon got a rented hall when he turned 30. I usually got a phone call sometime after 8 in the evening, if my mother remembered. And now, suddenly at 35, I was a guest of honor at a party built around a hardware store anniversary, with $250,000 hanging in the air and the word together doing a great deal of quiet and deliberate work. I have built my career on noticing when numbers are arranged to tell a story that isn't true. This required exactly the same skill, just pointed at my own family. The party wasn't a celebration. It was a stage. They were going to stand me up in front of everyone I had ever known, hand me a pen, and dare me to say no while the whole town watched and clapped. My mother had learned somewhere along the way that I would do almost anything to avoid making a scene. She was about to bet $250,000 on it that I didn't call my mother. I called the bank. The line of credit was held at Hartwell Savings, and the relationship manager on the account was a woman named Renee Ott. I had dealt with her 2 years earlier when I signed the original guarantee. She remembered me, which in my experience is what careful people do. I asked her to walk me through exactly how a renewal worked. She didn't rush. "The line matures at the end of May," she said. "It doesn't roll over automatically. To extend it, we rewrite the agreement, and the guarantor signs a new one." I asked whether anyone could sign that agreement on my behalf. "No," she said, almost amused. "Nobody can sign a personal guarantee for you. That's rather the point of a guarantee. It has to be you in person, wet ink. And if I didn't sign, the business would have to qualify on its own merits, or the line would mature and the full balance would come due immediately." I asked as neutrally as I could whether the store could qualify on its own. There was a pause, the careful kind. "I can't discuss the borrower standing with you," she said, "but I'd encourage you to think very carefully before you agree to anything." I thanked her, hung up, and sat in my condo for a long time. For the first time in my life, I understood the true shape of what I had been carrying. The store didn't run on the Lowell name. It ran on my signature. And a signature is the one thing in this world that nobody can take from you. You have to hand it over willingly. I had just decided that I wouldn't. I drove out to Hartwell on a Thursday night after closing, when I knew the store would be empty. I still had the keys, all 12 of them on that brass ring worn smooth from 26 years in my pocket. I let myself into the front, turned on the back office light, and left the rest of the store dark. I pulled the cash logs for the past 14 months and laid them next to the register tapes line by line, the way I do it for a professional client. A pattern emerged from the paper like a watermark rising. The till came up short on a rhythm. Never large amounts. $40 here, $60 there, $80 on a Good Friday. small enough that any single night looked like the mistake of a careless teenager. But across 14 months, it added up to something that was not careless at all. It was a habit, a system. I followed the trail further and found what I had glimpsed before and dismissed. A recurring payment labeled consulting going out monthly to a company name I didn't recognize. I copied the account number onto a slip of paper, locked up, and drove the 40 minutes home with my hands tied on the wheel. IT took me one evening at my kitchen table to find the answer, because the people who hide money from accountants are almost never accountants themselves. The consulting payments were going to a limited liability company registered with the Ohio Secretary of State 11 months earlier. The filing was public record. I didn't need anything more than a website and a cup of coffee. The registered agent, the organizer, the sole member. Every line on the form said the same name, Brandon Lowe. My brother had opened a company. Then he had hired that company to consult for the family store and signed the store's own checks to himself. 11 months of monthly payments, plus the petty cash skimmed from the till, plus whatever else I hadn't yet uncovered. The store wasn't only losing ground to the big box chain by the highway. It was being drained from the inside by the golden child everyone was so eager to protect. I leaned back in my chair and let the whole picture settle into place. My parents were calling me every night, weeping about legacy, begging me to stake my financial future on this store. And the entire time, the man they were doing to save the store for was the one bleeding it dry. I sat with the obvious question for a while. Did they know? I genuinely didn't know the answer. My mother is capable of looking straight at something and deciding not to see it, if seeing it would require her to admit that Brandon was anything less than perfect. My father signs whatever she puts in front of him. Maybe they knew and called it borrowing. Maybe they didn't know and never truly wanted to. Either way, it didn't change what I had to do. It only changed how much it was going to cost them. Aunt Morin took me to lunch 3 days before the party, at a diner 2 towns, over where no one would recognize us. She stirred her coffee a long time before she began. "You need to understand where your mother comes from," she said, "or you're going to spend the rest of your life thinking this is about you. It isn't." She told me about their childhood, about how their own mother, my grandmother, dead 20 years now, had a favorite, and it wasn't Carol. It was Morin, the pretty one, the easy one, the one who got the new coat while Carol received it handed down. "Your mother grew up being the child nobody picked," Morin said. "She swore she would never do that to her own children, and then she did it anyway. She just reversed it. She made Brandon the chosen one so completely that she never noticed what she had made of me in the process." I sat with that. The cruelty of it has an almost perfect symmetry. The girl who was never chosen grew up and chose so hard that she made another little girl carry the keys. "She isn't protecting Brandon," Morin said. "Not really. She's protecting that little girl nobody picked. Every time she gives him everything, she's giving it to herself." Then Morin reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "That's the why," she said. "It is not an excuse. Don't you ever let anyone tell you it's an excuse." I didn't cry, but I understood my mother for the first time in 35 years. And the strange thing is, it didn't make me want to sign. It made me absolutely certain that I never would. You don't heal a wound by handing it down. You stop it. The night before the party, I sat in my condo and prepared the way I prepare for a deposition. I laid out a plain navy dress. I charged my phone. I put together one thin folder containing a letter I had already sent to the bank, the LLC filing, and the reconciled cash logs. Not to wave around, not to perform with, but so that if I was accused in front of 200 people of abandoning my father, I would have the truth within arm's reach. I want to be honest about what I had done the week before, because it mattered more than anything that happened at the party itself. I had called Renee Ott and told her plainly that I had seen a renewal and increase application for the Lowell hardware line of credit, already printed, already dated, listed me as guarantor for $250,000, without my knowledge and without my agreement. I asked her one question. Had I authorized that? There was a short silence, the kind a professional takes when choosing words carefully on a recorded line. "We received an application from the borrower," she said. "It does name you as proposed guarantor. But to be very clear, a proposed guarantor is not a guarantor. Nothing is binding without your signature in person. I told her I wanted that stated in the file in writing. I sent a letter that afternoon, drafted with 2 sentences from Paul Stebbins, stating that I had not authorized and would not be signing any renewal, extension, or increase of the Lowell Hardware Credit Facility, and that no signature attributed to me should be considered valid unless executed in person before bank staff in wet ink. Renee wrote back within the hour confirming receipt and noting in the file. It was the most ordinary, bureaucratic act of self-defense imaginable. No drama, no confrontation. Just a letter, a confirmation, and a date stamp. The truth doesn't protect you on its own. The record does. I was not to walk into that party and make a speech. I was going to walk in having already, quietly and in writing, made my answer a matter of permanent fact before a single person in Hartwell even knew I had driven into town. The town square looked genuinely beautiful. String lights crisscrossed Main Street. A barbecue smoked at the curb. A banner the length of 2 cars read Lowell Hardware, 50 years on Main. Half of Hartwell was there. People I had gone to high school with, now with children of their own. My father's friends. 3 pews worth of churchgoers. And Brandon working the crowd in the green canvas apron with Lowell and Son stitched across the chest in gold, shaking hands like a man accepting inheritance he had already decided was his. There was a folding table set up near the front, draped in a tablecloth with a small microphone on a stand. I parked 2 streets over and walked in wearing the navy dress with the thin folder in my bag. The first thing my mother did when she saw me was take both my hands like we were close. "There she is," she announced to the people nearby. Our Tuesday drove all the way out for us. Drove all the way out, as if 40 minutes were an ocean, as if I hadn't been making that drive for free every single month for a decade. Somebody pressed a paper plate into my hand. Somebody else wished me a happy birthday, and then immediately asked when the big remodel was starting. The whole crowd had been told a story, and in that story, I was already a YESMY father stood near the table in his good shirt and wouldn't meet my eyes, which is how I knew the script was ready. The high school band finished the song. My mother touched his elbow. He picked up the microphone, tapped it twice, and the square went quiet beneath the string lights. 50 years, he began. 50 years his family has kept these doors open for this town. Then he turned, slowly and deliberately, and finally looked directly at me. And tonight, he said, we keep them open for 50 more. Together, MY mother moved like she had practiced it. Because she had. She crossed to the folding table, lifted the tablecloth at one corner, and produced a manila envelope I had found in the desk drawer. She slid the papers out, smoothed them flat, and set a pen on top. A nice pen, the kind you buy for a moment you want people to remember. Then she beckoned me forward with a warm public smile. "Tuesday, honey," she said, just close enough to the microphone that the front rows could hear. "Come on up. Just a little signature, so your father can sleep at night." The crowd made the sound crowds make, that low, encouraging murmur, a scattering of applause already starting as people half turned to watch the daughter do the right thing. Brandon drifted over to stand beside my father, hands in his apron pocket, grinning. As I stepped toward the table, he leaned toward a cousin beside him and said it low, but not quite low enough. The same words from the phone call weeks earlier, worn smooth from a lifetime of certainty. "Don't worry," he murmured. "The store was always going to be mine." He said about a store he was emptying with his own hands. He said it standing in an apron with his name on it, in front of a daughter who had never received one. And something about hearing it out loud, in public, with that pen sitting on the table and the whole town watching, made everything suddenly and completely simple. MY mother held out the pen. The square hushed, waiting for the easy yes they had all been promised. I looked at the pen, and I didn't take it. "I'm not signing tonight," I said. I didn't whisper it, and I didn't shout it. I said it the way you read a verdict. Clear enough for the front rows. Steady enough that no one could later call me hysterical. My mother's smile froze in place, still aimed at the crowd. "Tuesday," she said through it. "Don't be difficult. It's just a renewal." I shook my head once. "It's not a renewal," I said. "It's a $250,000 guarantee." And no, the murmur in the square changed pitch entirely. People who had been applauding a moment ago went still. Somebody near the barbecue stopped talking mid-sentence. My mother recovered quickly, the way she always does, and turned the warmth up. "Sweetheart, your father has worked his whole life. I know what he's worked for," I said, "and I love you." "I do." I let that sit, because it was true, and because I wanted everyone in that square to understand that what was happening was not hatred. I love you, and I'm not putting my name behind that loan. Both of those things are true at exactly the same time. IT is a strange kind of power, refusing calmly. People brace for a scene, and when you don't give them one, they don't know where to put their outrage. My father's face had gone a deep mottled red. Brandon's grin had curdled. My mother looked, for one unguarded second, genuinely shocked. Not hurt, shocked. The way a person looks when a tool they have relied on for 35 years suddenly stops working in their hand. She had bet $250,000 that I would rather sign than embarrass the family in public. And I had just very quietly, in front of the whole town, called a BETMY father set down the microphone, which somehow made everything worse, because the crowd leaned in to catch what came next without the amplification. He took 2 steps toward me. The string lights buzzed overhead. Up close, I could see his hands shaking. I understood even in that moment that the shaking wasn't only rage. It was fear. The bone-deep fear of man watching the one thing his name was attached to begin to slip in public, with the entire town as witness. He had built his whole sense of himself around being the man who kept Lowell Hardware open. And in front of all of them, his own daughter had just refused to keep building him. His voice came out low and steady and meant only for me, though the people nearest heard every word. He looked straight into my eyes, the way you look at someone when you want the words to land exactly where they will cause the most damage. And he said it. "I wish you were never born." Nobody moved. A woman near the front made a small sound and covered her mouth. The band kids stared at their shoes. My mother said nothing. She didn't reach for me. She didn't tell him to stop. She stood beside the table with the unsigned papers and the nice pen, and her silence agreed with him more loudly than anything she could have said out loud. And here's the part one I've thought about most in the months since. I expected it to break me. Nothing broke. Something closed instead. Quietly and completely. The way you close a ledger at the end of a year you are relieved is finally over. Every column had added up. The total sat there in plain ink with nothing left to dispute. He had told me in front of everyone I had ever known that he wished I did not exist. So I decided, standing right there under those string lights, to give him a version of exactly that I didn't argue. There was nothing left to argue. I reached into my bag and took out not the folder, but the brass ring. 12 keys, worn smooth from 26 years in my pocket. Front door, stockroom, register, safe, back gate. I set them down on the folding table, right on top of the unsigned papers and the nice pen. The sound they made on the wood was the loudest thing in that silent square. "Here," I said, "these are yours now. All of them." My father stared at the keys like something he had never seen before. My mother's mouth opened and nothing came out. Brandon, for once in his life, had stopped grinning. I turned to the crowd, to the high school friends now with children of their own, to the church ladies, to my father's poker friends, to the whole town that had come to watch me say yes. "Thank you all for coming out," I said, and I meant every word of it, because manners are the last thing they can take from you. Happy 50th. Then I walked through the middle of them, under the string lights, past the barbecue and the banner, to the corner and around it to where I had parked. Nobody followed me. I had carried those keys since I was 9 years old, since the day my mother decided I was responsible instead of beloved. Setting them down on that table was the lightest I had felt in 26 years. The next morning, I moved through my list the way I moved through a closing. One item at a time, no wasted motion. I moved my savings into a new account at a bank my family had no history with. I signed a lease on a quiet 2-bedroom across the city. Farther out, harder to find, with a guest room I had no intention of offering to anyone in Hartwell. And I sent the final formal letter to Hartwell Savings through Paul Stebbins, confirming in permanent writing that I would not be renewing, extending, or increasing the Lowell Hardware Credit Facility under any circumstances, and that any document bearing my name as guarantor on any new or increased facility was unauthorized and void. Certified mail, date stamped, done. Then I turned off my phone, which had 41 missed calls, and made coffee in the kitchen where no one was counting on me to fix anything. What happened next came to me through Morin, who called every few days with the news from Hartwell. At first, my family waited, certain I would fold. She's pouting, my mother told the relatives. She'll come around. She always does. Tuesday can't stand loose ends. They were so certain I would cave that they spent the first week doing nothing at all, just watching the calendar. The red circle was still on the wall. And now it wasn't Target. It was a fuse. When the maturity date arrived, the line of credit didn't renew, because there was no qualified guarantor to sign it, and there was never going to be one again. The full balance came due on a store that couldn't cover 3 months of payables. My father drove to every bank in the county in his good shirt and received the same answer each time. The store's financials didn't support new credit. No bank was going to lend into that without a guarantor. And the only guarantor they had ever had was 40 minutes away in a new apartment, not answering her phone. The bank's renewal review had done the one thing I never had to do myself. When their underwriters pulled the store's financials to assess the increase application, they found the cash discrepancies across 14 months and the recurring payments from the business to an outside company registered to one of the account's own authorized signers. Renee called to tell me the bank had scheduled a meeting with the borrower, and as a named party on the original guarantee, I was entitled to attend. I thought about it for one full day. Then I put on a navy dress and drove the 40 minutes out to Hartwell Savings with my thin folder under my arm. The conference room had a long table and fluorescent light that made everyone look like they had been crying whether they had or not. They were all already seated when I arrived. My mother in her church clothes. My father, gray-faced and smaller than I remembered. Brandon, jittery, his foot bouncing under the table. And Morin in the back, who gave me one small nod that did more for me than any speech could have managed. Renee sat at the head of the table with the branch manager, 2 thick folders squared neatly in front of them. The line of credit matured today. She opened. The full balance is due. The renewal cannot proceed without a qualified guarantor's signature, and we receive written notice that the previously named guarantor is not signing. Every head turned to me. I said the only thing I had come to say, hands folded on my unopened folder. I'm not signing. That's correct? My mother's voice cracked on cue. Tuesday, you're killing your father. The manipulative tears, the ones that had worked for 35 years. I held still. You cannot argue with someone who refuses to perform. Then Renee turned a page and continued in the same level tone, and the temperature in the room changed. There's a second matter, she said. During the renewal review, our underwriting flagged a pattern of cash discrepancies in the store's deposits over the past 14 months, along with recurring payments from the business to an outside company registered to one of the account's authorized signers. She didn't say his name. She didn't have to. Brandon, when the color of paper, he shot to his feet, knocking his chair, insisting that I had set him up, that I was jealous, that I had always been jealous. My father put his face in his hands. My mother turned on me, the tears gone, her voice low and quiet and precise. You always did keep receipts on your own family. She meant it one final time as a wound. I looked at her and answered the sentence she had been using against me since I was a child sitting on a cold floor counting a till. Yes, I said, I do. It's the only reason all of this is on the record and not on me. The branch manager brought the room back to the only language the bank speaks. The facility had matured. The balance was due. The collateral on the original guarantee was the store's own inventory and fixtures, not my home, not my savings. To satisfy the debt, those assets would be liquidated. The discrepancy findings would be referred for review before the borrower could be considered for any new facility. He said it without cruelty and without mercy. Only facts laid in a row that I stood up. I looked at my mother and then at my father and kept my voice as level as a finished ledger. I'll always love you, I said, and I will never again be the name you sign your mistakes against. Those aren't the same thing, and I'm done pretending they are. Morin rose with me. Renee gave me the smallest professional nod, the nod of one careful person to another. I picked up my folder, the one I never had to open, and walked out of that glass room into the May afternoon. Lowell Hardware closed in August. The inventory was liquidated to cover the matured loan. The fixtures were sold. The key-cutting machine went to a man who runs a shop 2 towns over. The new owner gutted the building for a physical therapy clinic, and the first thing he did was call a locksmith and rekey every door. The brass ring I had carried since I was 9 years old opened nothing at all anymore. Brandon's company didn't survive the exposure. The skimming and consulting payments became a matter between him, the bank, and eventually a lawyer. The green canvas apron with Lowell and Son stitched in gold ended up in a 50-cent bin at the estate sale. I'm told nobody bought it. My parents moved to a rental on the edge of town. My father sent me one message in October. 6 words. I shouldn't have said that. Sorry, I haven't answered it yet. Maybe I will, but I am not in any hurry, and I no longer feel that I owe anyone my weekends to prove it. For most of my life, I believed that love meant being the one who always signed, the one who fixed everything quietly and never sent a bill. I've learned that sometimes the most honest thing you can do, for them and for yourself both, is to set the pen down, keep your own name entirely to yourself, and walk out while you can still recognize the hand that is holding it. One signature I refused, and one bank calendar did the rest. The store was never always going to be Brandon's. It turned out the store was never really anyone's except the bank's, and for 2 short years, mine. I gave it back the only way that was ever going to stick, by keeping my own name.